Welcome everyone to this video. In this video, we'll be looking at how to remove any object's background using Photoshop. This is the part 2 of this series, and if you want to use these exact same images, the links will be in the description below. So now let's start. So earlier in the previous video, we used the quick selection tool to make selections. So we just manually selected or just selected select subject, and Photoshop's AI just selected the subject. But there's another tool to select anything in Photoshop, and that is object selection tool. So if you just right click here, you will get this object selection tool, and here you'll just have to make like a box and tell that this is where the subject is and or the object, not just subject, and it will try to make a selection. So here you can see it made a pretty good selection, and now let's just mask it out. So after masking, here you can see, let's go to the move tool. So here you can see after masking, this is not a good selection. This does not look like fur, because in fur you can see the individual hair, whereas here you cannot. It's just like one hard selection. So how can we refine it? So to refine it, we'll go to any of these tools, object selection, quick selection, or magic wand. So here you'll see there are two options: select subject, we already know what that is. So there's another option called select and mask. So now let's just click on it, and it will open up like a separate window, and there are two new things here. So there are some new tools, and these are the properties of this mask or selection. So let's go over them one by one. So let's start with the properties. So here in view mode, you can just choose your view mode. So in the background you would like on black. So here you can see, if I just clicked on black, you can see we cannot see black. It's just like some grayish kind of thing. So that is because the opacity is to 50%. Now if I just move the opacity to 100%, here you can see the background turned to black. So here you can see you can just choose any of these background, but most of the times I just do overlays because it's a bright red color, and you can see your mistakes if there are with this color as your background. But if you don't want to use these color, and the color that you want isn't in this menu, you can just go to color and pick any color you want. For example, a bright green or any color that you want. But for now I'm just gonna pick the default red color. So now let's move on to the global refinement. So I just scroll down, and here they are, global refinements. And to show you what global refinements are, I'm gonna change the view mode to black and white. So now let's scroll down again, and now I'm just gonna zoom in. So you can just zoom in by going to the zoom tool. We know what is the zoom tool. Or you can just hit alt and move your scroll wheel, or just hit Control plus and minus for zooming in and out. So Control plus plus plus, and then we can pan by hitting the space bar. And here you can see the selections edges are pretty jagged. So to like refine these jagged edges, we have this global refinement, which is smooth. So it smoothens out the jagged edges. And I also wanted to give you a tip in Photoshop, that if you're not understanding what any like tool or anything, any refinement or anything, what it means, you can just hover on it, and here you can see like a toolbox, not toolbox, but a square comes, and the explanation for that refinement tool or anything will be there. So I'm just hovering on this smooth, and here you can see it smoothens jagged edges, and here you can see we have jagged edges. So if I just move this smooth, here you can see these jagged edges will get smoothened. Here you can see, if I just hit smooth, here you can see, whoops, so here you can see these jagged edges have gotten smoothed. So I'm just gonna move this to 0. And now then we have the feather. So what feather does, it just blurs out all the edges. So I'll zoom out to show you this. So if I just increase the feather, here you will see it will start to blur out the edges. So the edges are blurring, and here you can see if I just move this to like 650, here you can see all of the selection or the mask is blurred out. So this is what feather is, and most of the times I don't use feather. Now let's zoom in again. Then we have the contrast. So it just makes the edges much more harder. Here you can see they were a little blurred out in the edges, but if I just move contrast, here you can see they are all hard and crisp edges. So I'm just gonna move contrast to 0 again. And then we have the shift edge. So I'm just gonna explain this in the normal overlay view mode. So let's go back to the overlay view mode. Here you can see overlay, and I will explain to you after we have refined this selection. So first let's see how can we refine this selection. So here you can see we have this refine edge brush tool. So I'm just gonna click on it, and if your brush is this small like mine, you can just go here on, click on this arrow, and then just increase or decrease the size. Or we have a shortcut, which is the right square bracket key will increase the size of the brush, and the left square bracket key will decrease the size of the brush. So just like increase your brush size to about this much, and then just paint here on the edges, and here you can see it will like magically just refine these edges. So I'm just gonna paint here, and here you can see now we can see the individual hair of the fur. Now let's do this exact same thing on the right side as well. So I'm just painting on the edges, and now let's decrease the size with the left square bracket key, and now let's paint again. And now let's increase the size again, and let's just paint like this. And here you can see we have pretty much refined the selection. Now we can see these individual hair of the fur. So I'm just gonna move this once again here on this area, and I think we're pretty much done. So now let's see what is shift edge. So it just moves your selection or the mask inwards or outwards. So if I just move the shift edge to about 100%, here you can see it moved the mask or the selection inwards. Now if I just move the shift edge to about 100%, here you can see it moved the selection outwards. First it was this, now it's this. So it is a pretty handy thing, because sometimes we have like this white line or cast on the edges. So we can just use shift edge, reduce it a little bit, and that thing is then solved. So you can see we lost some of this fur here. So what we can do is just go to refine edge brush tool, and then hit alt, and then brush again, and the fur comes back. So here you can see we have pretty much refined all of this selection, and now let's just hit OK. So here you can see we have refined the selection. Now we can see the individual hair of the fur on this cat. And now let's just make a new layer by clicking here, this new layer, and now I'll move this new layer here behind our actual subject layer. And now we can just make a gradient, or just right click paint bucket tool. You can add a a solid color, for example black, in the background to see if you have successfully removed the background, which we can clearly see we have. Or you can just make a beautiful gradient. So let's just see, let's try some pinks, and let's choose this gradient, and voila, we have removed the background of this image. Now let's move on to the second image. So now let's move on to the second image. So now let's make a selection. So I know we can just go to the object selection tool or just hit select subject, but I want you to practice the manual selection because sometimes Photoshop's AI doesn't work and you have to do a manual selection. So now let's practice it, and I also wanted to just tell what problems can you face while manually selecting and how to just solve them. So here you can see I'm manually selecting. So just drag, select and drag your mouse. I'm just dragging the mouse here and there, and Photoshop's AI is just selecting the subject while I'm dragging. And now I have selected the subject. So there's some bit right here, so I'm just gonna click, and now we have made a selection. So now let's say you were making a selection and you just move outwards and oh my god, now what to do? So to remove this part from your selection, you can just hit alt. So here you can see the sign changes from plus to a minus, and now just drag and this part will be removed from your selection. And let's say while removing this part, you just remove this part from the image. Now how to solve this? Just don't hit any key and just include this in your selection, clicking and dragging the same bit. So here you can see I intentionally selected some of the background right here, so I can just hit alt. Just see, you can see plus, from plus to minus, and then just click here, and now that part is removed. Now let's make a mask. So now I've made a mask. Now to refine it, let's go to select and mask. So now let's go to our reliable refined edge brush tool, or the shortcut key is R. Here you can see if I hover, you can see the name of the brush and the shortcut key, which is R. So now let's just zoom in, and I think this size is probably right, and now let's just paint on the edges. Here you can see all those individual hair are coming back. Here you can see if I just drag, and that gray background is getting removed. So I'm just gonna do this. So I'm just gonna paint here and there, and I think we're pretty much done here. So I'm just gonna zoom out. So here you can see we have some global refinements. So I don't think we have to smooth, but I will say that I'll just use some shift edge. I always use some shift edge, just to about minus 10%. So if we have that white cast or any that white line or any colored line, that gets removed using the shift edge. So I'm just gonna use the shift edge to about minus 10%, minus 9%, and I think that's done. I'm just gonna use some contrast, and I think this is it. Now I'm just gonna hit OK, and here you can see we have successfully removed the background. So here you can see it gives us the new layer. So this was the old one, and now this is the new one. So here you can see we can see those individual hair. Now let's make a new layer, and now just make a gradient to see if we have successfully done it. Yes, we have removed the background. So this was it for this video, and in the next video we'll see how to turn a daytime photo into a nighttime photo. It's gonna be a fun one, so I'll meet you there.